May 1945. The guns of Europe fall silent. Across the continent, church bells ring, flags rise, and soldiers embrace in the streets as Germany surrenders. After 6 years of destruction, the Second World War in Europe is finally over. And for millions, it is a moment of relief and celebration, a chance to believe the world can begin to heal. But for General George S. Patton, victory feels different. While Allied leaders turn their attention to peace treaties, reconstruction, and bringing their troops home, Patton looks east toward the vast territories now occupied by the Soviet Red Army. Where others see allies who helped defeat Hitler, Patton sees something far more dangerous. From his headquarters in Bavaria, he watches Soviet forces tighten their grip on Eastern Europe. Cities liberated becoming cities controlled, borders shifting, and new puppet governments appearing almost overnight. To Patton, this does not look like the end of a war. It looks like the beginning of another. While diplomats speak of cooperation and post-war unity, Patton privately warns that the Soviet Union is not a partner in peace, but a rival preparing for domination. In his mind, the true threat to Europe has simply changed uniforms. The war may be over, but the danger, he believes, has only just begun. From the moment Patton first met Soviet commanders in the ruins of Central Europe, his suspicions hardened into conviction. He watched Red Army units move through cities in Czechoslovakia and Eastern Germany, not as liberators, but as conquerors claiming territory. Their behavior was calculated, confident, and unapologetic. Soviet officers boasted of victory while their troops commandeered factories, seized rail lines, and stripped villages of supplies. Where American units tried to stabilize regions and hand authority back to civilians, the Soviets installed political committees loyal to Moscow and refused to withdraw from areas they now considered theirs by right of conquest. Patton saw Soviet patrols probing deeper across unofficial boundaries, testing Allied reactions, pushing forward wherever resistance was weak. To him, this was not the conduct of a temporary wartime ally, it was the footprint of an empire expanding westward. In private conversations and field reports, Patton warned that Stalin was not preparing for peace, he was preparing for control. The Red Army, he believed, had no intention of stopping where the war had ended.
As Patton observed the Soviet advance, his warnings grew sharper, and soon he voiced one of the most controversial beliefs of his career, that the United States had fought the wrong enemy. In private conversations with fellow officers and in letters to colleagues, Patton argued that Germany, though defeated and broken, was now the only nation in Europe capable of standing against Soviet power. He believed that instead of dismantling the remnants of the German army, the West should be preparing to rebuild and rearm it as a bulwark against Moscow. To Patton, the Red Army was not an ally that had earned trust, but a looming force that would one day challenge the free world. He warned that the Americans and British had traded one threat for another, and that while the world celebrated peace, the seeds of the next conflict were already being planted. These views shocked diplomats and outraged political leaders who feared that such thinking could destabilize fragile post-war negotiations. But Patton remained unmoved. He was convinced that history would prove him right, and that Europe's future would be shaped not by treaties, but by the coming struggle between East and West. Patton's growing defiance soon placed him on a collision course with American political leadership, especially when his criticisms expanded beyond the Soviets to challenge U.S. occupation policy itself. He openly questioned the denazification program, arguing that purging every former party member from public life crippled Germany's ability to rebuild, and he shocked superiors by comparing average Nazi Party members to ordinary Democrats or Republicans who had simply joined the dominant political organization of their time. To Washington, these remarks sounded dangerously sympathetic to former enemies, but to Patton, they were practical realities of governance. He believed that the real threat was not defeated Germans trying to survive, but Soviet agents spreading influence across Europe while the West dismantled its own potential allies. As his speeches circulated through newspapers and military briefings, public controversy erupted and pressure mounted on Eisenhower to act. Patton was removed from command of the Third Army and reassigned to a symbolic, powerless post, a move meant to silence him and prevent further diplomatic embarrassment. Yet, even in isolation, Patton refused to soften his warnings, convinced that American leaders were ignoring a truth he believed was already visible on the horizon.
The uneasy alliance with Moscow was collapsing, and a new geopolitical struggle was beginning to take shape. In the final months of his life, Patton became increasingly isolated, a warrior without a battlefield, watching a Europe he believed was drifting into Soviet domination. Stripped of real authority and ignored by policymakers, he confided his fears in letters and private conversations, warning that the United States had made a grave strategic mistake by trusting Stalin and demobilizing too quickly. He believed that the West had surrendered the initiative and that the Red Army was already consolidating control over Eastern Europe, while American leaders celebrated a peace he was certain would not last. Patton spoke openly of his desire to confront the Soviets before they grew stronger, even suggesting that the United States should rearm German soldiers and prepare for what he called the inevitable future war. His words unsettled colleagues and infuriated politicians who saw them as reckless and dangerous in a fragile post-war world. Yet to Patton, they were not provocation, they were prophecy. Only weeks later, his career and his voice were silenced when he was severely injured in a mysterious car accident in December 1945 and died shortly afterward. With him went one of the earliest and most outspoken warnings about the coming Cold War, leaving historians to debate whether Patton was dangerously extreme or simply one of the first men to see the shadow that was already falling across Europe. In the years that followed his death, Patton's warnings about the Soviet Union took on a new and haunting relevance as the Iron Curtain descended across Eastern Europe and the Cold War emerged exactly as he had predicted. To some historians, this transformed Patton from a controversial figure into a grim prophet, a man who had seen the geopolitical fault lines forming long before diplomats acknowledged them. Yet his legacy remains deeply divided. Admirers view him as a hard-edged realist who understood power politics better than the politicians who silenced him, a soldier who recognized that Soviet expansion would reshape the world order. Critics, however, argue that his aggressive rhetoric and willingness to contemplate immediate confrontation could have plunged the world into another catastrophic war only months after the last one ended.
Over time, Patton's post-war statements became part of a larger debate about preparedness, deterrence, and how democracies should confront emerging threats. His reputation endures not only as one of America's greatest battlefield commanders, but as a polarizing voice whose final warnings continue to echo through history, a reminder of the uneasy transition from World War to Cold War, and of a general who believed that the peace the world celebrated was merely the calm before another storm. Today, Patton's post-war views continue to spark debate among scholars, soldiers, and political thinkers, shaping how we remember both the man and the moment in history he refused to ignore. His letters, diaries, and recorded remarks reveal a commander who saw geopolitics through the lens of warfare, direct, uncompromising, and often unsettling. To modern audiences, Patton stands at the crossroads between triumph and tension, a victorious general who emerged from one of history's greatest conflicts, only to warn of another taking shape in the shadows. His story forces us to confront difficult questions about power, alliance, and foresight. Was Patton a reckless militarist, unable to let go of war, or a strategist who recognized the coming clash of superpowers before it hardened into decades-long rivalry? As historians revisit the dawn of the Cold War, his voice lingers like an echo from the battlefield, a reminder that even in moments of victory, the future can shift without warning, and that sometimes the most controversial warnings are the ones history later remembers. As the Cold War unfolded in the decades after Patton's death, his warnings became part of a broader cultural memory, resurfacing in documentaries, military studies, and political debates about deterrence and power.
Declassified intelligence, Soviet archives, and post-war strategic analyses revealed just how quickly Eastern Europe was absorbed into Moscow's orbit, prompting many to revisit Patton's fears with new perspective. Some analysts argue that, while his call for immediate confrontation would have been catastrophic, his instinct about Soviet ambitions was undeniably prescient. Others maintain that his vision was shaped by a lifetime of warfare, leaving him unable to accept a world defined by diplomacy rather than battlefield resolve. Yet, whether interpreted as cautionary insight or dangerous extremism, Patton's post-war message endures as a stark historical tension, a reminder that victory can mask new threats, and that the transition from alliance to rivalry is often visible first to those standing closest to the front lines of history.